the Northwest home for paranormal. You're listening to U.S. Phenomenon with your host, Mario Magana.
It all began on a drive home from swing shift. The radio, my only companion. The legendary Art Bell filled the car, a beacon in the darkness, speaking worlds beyond our own. The stories untold, secrets that kept just out of sight. That voice, those tales ignited a spark within me, a drive to seek the truth and explore the phenomenon that lies just beyond the edge of reason. From the whispers of the paranormal to echoes of the unknown, my quest began. So join me, fellow night travelers, as our journey delves into the enigma of the night's uncovering mysteries that await us. This is U.S. Phenomenon, where the search for the answers never ends. The adventures just begin. Tonight, we're going to talk to our very own Pacific Northwest Robert Stack. I would say this guy has been boots on the ground for quite some time. He goes by the name of Photog Steve, but his real name is Steve Hickey. Welcome to U.S. Phenomenon.
Thank you for having me on. I've been looking forward to this.
Okay, so I say this minus you don't have the jacket when you're out there. Now, do you ever get creeped out when you're out there at night? It's like dark 30. It is like pitch black in some of your videos. Like it's dark. Do you ever like get that the unsolved mystery theme song going through your head and you're like, who the hell else is out here with me?
You know, it depends on the location. A lot of what I do is in the city, but some of those times when you have to drive out of town for 45 minutes to an hour and the street lights disappear and you're kind of just working with the moonlight and you're in the trees, it can get can definitely feel a little sketchy.
And so how long have you been doing photog work and news reporting and such like that, for those who may not know?
So I've only been doing this now a few years. I kind of started during the 2020 protests in Seattle and Portland, and I was dabbling with it. I was home. It was a pandemic, and at the time I was still building homes and developing real estate. So at the time I thought it was just a moment in time I would use this hobby I had to go and capture what was going on. Took some time off, and then about a year and a half, 2 years later, decided I really love this work and I want to really commit to it.
It's interesting that you say that because some of the footage that you had that time seems like a lifetime ago, right? 2020 pandemic seems like another world from like today's day where everything seems to be relatively back to normal.
Yeah.
Minus all the stuff in Portland recently gone that is closed. Same with Seattle. It's like it kind of has that urban like tumbleweed feel to it, is what I guess I would say. What was it like to cover both sides, the Seattle side and the Portland side, when you were getting this footage?
Yeah, I found so, I started in Seattle because I'm from the area. And at the time, I thought I was just going to capture this, create a library. And then maybe years later, as they go back and say, well, what happened and start making documentaries, that I would have some footage. So I didn't really have a long-term goal at the time. And then as it developed out here, the national news agencies started coming to town, like NBC and CBS and ABC. And I've been a news nerd since I was a little kid. And
Right.
so a lot of those people walk around, they don't get recognized. I know who everybody is, including the producers who are behind the scene. I know who they are. And so we started chatting. We were parking in the same parking lot. They asked what I was doing, really liked the footage, and said, hey, we'd like to license. And then that turned into, have you thought about going to Portland? We don't really have anybody down there. And I found out that in these scenarios, when they want to go in and cover it, they have to have such a large group of people. There's your on-screen journalist or talent, your camera guy, sound guy, producer. It's 5, 6 people. I can go out, grab it, and as one person and not create such a spectacle. And so they said, we'd like you to go to Portland. I did that. And so the two cities operated very differently. And the footage I would send back, people up here would say, man, it's so crazy down there. It must be must be scary or whatever. No, they were a lot more intense down there, but the crowds that I was standing in seemed to be more unified with each other compared to Seattle. Seattle felt pretty fragmented and pretty hostile as a whole. Portland, and it's not to say whether or not you are for or against what they're about, but they certainly have unified and found commonality within the crowd down there in a way that Seattle hadn't.
Excuse me. It's fun. It's crazy when you talk about that. As I sit here and choke on my own saliva and try to recover. Um, woo. Um, to see some of the footage from Seattle, the whole chop
Mhm.
situation, when you look at it, it seemed like, and then Portland had their own version of the chop, right? They had their own little sector of like something of the chop. Is that right?
Yeah, so theirs really rested around there was this federal building that became kind of the epicenter, and then the president came in and said that they were going to, protect this building. And once the president stepped in and spoke about it, that really became all of a sudden all the efforts really just kind of unified, and it became kind of them against the government. It started out as a social justice movement, then really became that at that building, and then that's when I think it really intensified down there. Where Seattle, there was the chop, but it was also still pretty spread out as well. And the chop seemed to be more, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, the chop seemed to be more a unified group of people who felt a certain way. Portland had that same feel, but also was a unified group of people who also really wanted to make the fact that government was stepping in to protect this building as a big part of their cause as well.
Wow, like I go back and I think about all that stuff that happened during that time, and I was actually working at the time for the ABC affiliate in town
Oh yeah.
in the engineering department, and clearly when we're watching police guys come back in to bring in gear, we're like, "You got to leave your gear over here. We don't know who you've been around." It's crazy to go back and think about that. When you talk about being, a small group, or for yourself when you were going out in the field, and you still are, and you're looking at these small, like your footprint is smaller. Were you using AI cameras at the time to get some of your footage, or
No,
were
I
you?
just I use a full frame camera. It depends on what I was going to go and do. So I use most of my. I'm heavily into kind of the Sony ecosystem. So I have A7R4s. At the time, that's all I was using. I've added FX3 now, but at the time, all A7R4. And so you can pretty much handhold that. I like to add a little bit of gear to it, so I have a monitor, but you can also kit it out to where I have it, where it'll be on a tripod, and you can actually shoulder it.
Sure.
And sometimes especially in Portland, when you had kind of outside agencies coming to have this law enforcement component, you really want to, if you're holding an iPhone, they seem to take those people as hostile. If you had a commercial looking rig, they would still take you as hostile, but give you a little bit of grace that somehow you must be traditional media. And so there's some expectation of being able to be there. But that whole time too brought out a lot of interesting things. So, when the laws about press came in, I have a press pass and an agency that I assign it to, but you don't actually have to have that. This was kind of designed decades ago, and the concept was if you had a camera, you were media. Well, back then you had to have a big, expensive camera. Now you can have a phone. But those same protections are still in place. The other side is you get a lot of people who are there to document, but they're there to document as a protester as well, or as whatever that situation is. For me, I really wanted to come there as an observer. There's some people who want to kind of fit in. They'll dress a certain way to match the crowd. I would dress the same way I do every day, in shorts and a t-shirt. I look like everybody's dad. And so, to say I'm not for you, I'm not for you, I'm not either side. I'm just here observing, and as an outsider who's not even from the area, basically. And that way, at least they knew kind of who I was, and it seemed to help. Because sometimes you would get where law enforcement would really want cameras not there, and they would seem to target, and then sometimes you would get the crowds that don't want cameras there. So if you just kind of fit in the middle and have everybody a little bit on edge about what you're about, it seems to kind of actually work better overall.
Our guest this evening goes by the handle on Instagram as Photog Steve 81. Uh, the mysterious things that you have covered, one that really intrigued my interest, one of vast many stories that you've covered, but the one that I bring up here is this one here that talks about. I need to pull up the link here so I can play it, but it talks about limbs. How did you become? How did the story come to you?
So I had followed this in the past for a little bit. It seems to kind of come and go, and there was more washing up some years ago. Originally, I thought maybe it's part of the tsunami, and so you kind of have we're
Oh,
coastal.
okay.
Washington's a coastal state, and so's Oregon, and so every so often you would have limbs. There's a lot of feet because they're still in shoes wash up on shore, and so for a while they thought it was part of the tsunami that had hit country over on the other side of the world. Maybe the people were washing up over here. And then there was a thought, of course, we're like the serial capital of the country out here. We've had a lot of serial killers in the Seattle area. That's just factual. And so there was a thought, well, could there be another serial killer? There's the Dexter concept. Could they be out there dumping them and they're just making their way up? And so here and there, I would kind of follow it, and it becomes this kind of urban legend story. Everybody has a theory. And then recently, it was sent to me that, hey, scientists got together. They've studied the currents. They believe that these body parts could not be making it all the way from around the world. It's more likely that these are boats that have sank with, pleasure boats. People who went out for the weekend, went out for the day, have
Oh man.
sunk and then washed up or drowned. And the more I looked into it, it's a logical explanation. I did the story kind of tongue in cheek because with stories like this, it doesn't matter if you come with science, whatever you come with, people are going to say, it can't be that, it's got to be this. So I kind of tried to tell the story of, hey, this is what science tells you because it's saying it's just doing science stuff and kind of a little bit of sarcasm with it. But the theory checked out. It seems now to be in the investigative community the accepted reason for these body parts, and they have had a number come back where they've done DNA and they've tied to boats that have disappeared. But like I said, no matter what you do, people are going to have their own opinions.
Sure. I mean, and that's the crazy thing. I saw the story and I was like, oh, ew. God, can you imagine you're on your beachcomber and you're hanging out and is that a shoe? Oh no, that's a shoe. And I'm trying to think how many times have I gone out there and like I don't think I've ever seen anything of the nature, but to see
No.
a shoe wash ashore and as you're right, to protect the foot still the limb everything in that foot is still intact, right? Because the shoe's protecting the what would be essentially, you know, fish food, the bait
Mhm.
of the rest of the human remain. Quite interesting story. When you're out here and you're doing these different stories, and I'm assuming you're doing this now full time, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's a full-time job.
And how much have you been giving to like the local affiliates? Are they purchasing your
Hmm.
stuff now? The stories that you're covering. The reason I think I come to you now is because when we talk about media and we talk about the pandemic, there seems to be this stigma that is really portrayed out there with the media that there's a lean or a bias to a story that their parent company may be pushing some type of bias to the story. And to me, that watching your stuff over time just comes to me as straight factual. The old school journalistic. I mean, just as you were saying earlier, how I kind of grew up the same way. A nerd watching news. I thought my best friend was, Susan Hutchinson and, the local guys from town. But clearly, when I watched the CBS affiliate, Cairo back in the day, and then becoming going to work for the, Como TV, I was like, well, I can't watch that station anymore. Clear. I was like, CBS isn't paying my paycheck. Um, everyone quite great at the local level, but it seemed like the pandemic really changed a lot of the media and how you consume the media. And either, however, some people may think the media may not be telling truths to all these stories. And what has come across on all of your stuff on how it's, you know, put on the social media platforms, that everything seems to be just straightforward facts and how we're consuming this. I would call you the modern day, Dan Rather, or, like Tom Brokaw or Peter Jennings were like the younger versions of these out in the field telling these stories. At least that's how it comes across to me, that there isn't anything other than the straight facts and a great story that is being told by you. And it's, to me, it felt like someone who's been in the business and has seen it, it felt and it feels like you've been doing this for decades.
Thank you.
So,
I was hoping you would ask about this because I actually kind of stepped in something here in this last week as I told a story and I mentioned that, hey, I'm the only one telling you this, which was
right.
accurate, but the way I did it, I got a lot of feedback and more actually in my text messages. People actually have my number who I work around who was like, why are you roasting everybody? And I really didn't mean it that way. And so I've been hoping to kind of expand on this. I said I grew up as a news nerd. I love being able now at this point in my life, being able to go out and help people understand things and explain stuff. I think that's a big part of what the media is about. That being said, there is obviously bias depending on the different agency and affiliate and parent company. There just is. And they themselves will tell you that. That's kind of what they market for, right? Is they say, hey, one of the local stations that's affiliate, it really focuses on a lot of narrative storytelling. They're now even going back and telling unsolved homicides from the past. They're phenomenal at it. Then you have another group that really doesn't do any of that, and they just tell, hey, here's what happened in the night. So everybody kind of has their thing. That being said, they only have a certain amount of time. Somebody like me kind of has unlimited time. I don't have to find out the story happened at 9 a.m. and have to get it for the noon airing or the 6 o'clock airing. I can air whenever I want. I can spend as much time on it. I can zero in, stop worrying about other things. And so when they have their meeting in the morning, this is usually how it goes for those who, you probably know this, but a lot don't. They have their morning news meeting that starts out the day. And everybody comes in and they go, what's going on out there? Who's going to work on what? And most all the resources for the day are there in that room. And so whatever they have to figure out, what are we going to tell today? That in itself is going to inherently create some sort of narrative and decision-making process, right? They're going to have to kill some stories. They're going to have to go put a bunch on other stories. And it's based on the amount of resources they have. Then comes the time limit that they go, okay, you leave the office there at 10 a.m. and you have to have it ready by 4 o'clock. You can only do so much. And those kind of things inherently do create at least narrative. You could argue also bias, but I think where a lot of this has changed is back when we were growing up, they had a lot more resources. They had a lot more reporters in the street. I do not gatekeep my stories. Every story that I work on that is local, that we go and film, we offer to all the news stations. I do not believe in gatekeeping the information to the public. The way that works is myself and 2 other photographers, we go out every night and we capture stuff. Last night, we got a wrong way driver on I-5 that hit a woman in a van, and I'm still waiting to get confirmation. Sounds like the victim is not going to die, but her life is forever changed, heavily changed. That's available for them to grab. Nobody's grabbed it. We've had actual full-blown homicides at a homicide in Auburn, and nobody picked it up. So these are really serious stories. Now, it's for a couple of reasons. One, they didn't have anybody that they could send there. They didn't have enough resources because their budgets are slashed. They don't have people. Two, when they get it from me, it's not because, Steve Hickey sent it in and I write a narrative like we can trust it. I'm not their reporter. I can work with that. I've seen it. I've spoken to people out there. I've spoken to law enforcement. I've listened to the entire call through radio traffic. I have firsthand account. They can't do that. So what happens is they get overnight. I send them a footage package and say, hey, there was a homicide. Here's footage of the scene, the coroner, the police. This is the nature of the call. I give them, kind of the 10 facts of how the call came in, what they believed happened, and who's been arrested. They then have to reach out to the agencies that responded and get a written statement from them that they can work with. And a lot of times they don't get those statements. The statements don't come in time, or by the time it does, it's already days old. So there have been stories that they want to tell, but they can't. And had they just sent their own reporter and their own camera there, they would have done the exact same thing I did, whether law enforcement gave them the full breakdown or not. But because they couldn't even go in the first place, it doesn't get told. And we're talking 80% of the stories that we send in don't get picked up. And I'm not going out chasing parking tickets and things that don't have public interest. We don't upload unless it's a serious situation.
And what's interesting to me is when you talk about these stories, these um, major stories that have been covered in like interesting facts of like, for example, when I think there was a story where there wasn't a lot of information being told about Mayor McGinn's son, that whole situation. I'm like, wait, why is this story not being told in the normal media? Is it, as you're saying, do they not have the resources, or is it a narrative? I can't imagine that in local news that they really would be pushing like, well, we're not going to cover it because I guess they, maybe they don't have the. I'm not going to defend them in that piece,
Sure,
but
sure.
it's interesting to me that a lot of these stories that are being told aren't being covered anymore. Um, but again, like you said, TV news resources have become so much smaller. The business, which I think is now catching up to it, the radio version, now the TV version, radio shrinking and being, consumed by conglomerates, tracking out, syndicated shows, blah, 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 blah. You don't have the whole old school news feel 24/7. Yes, there's someone in the newsroom, but the resources to go out, fly a chopper, because no one's doing
Yeah.
that anymore. Just
To
because
that
it's,
point, there's only one chopper left. If you see it on Como, it's Air 4. If you see it on Cairo, it's
yeah,
Cairo's. It's all the same helicopter, and they're still looking at canceling that. They still, with all three of them contributing, cannot make that work.
yeah. I'll add one to that. I actually called those guys over. I was like, "Hey, what's going on in West Seattle?" I live over in West Seattle, and they're like, I said, "There's a helicopter." They're like, "Well, it's not ours," and it's not. I was like, "What do you mean it's not ours?"
Right?
They're like, I, "I'm like," I was like, "You guys still have the chop?" They're like, "No, we got rid of it. All the stations in December, the
Yeah.
contract was ended, so they cut." But that to say the least, I'm like, "Oh, wow, okay, well, budget must be tight." But these stories that you're covering that maybe aren't being covered, you're able to work on these stories a lot longer than most, uh, and be able to tell the. I don't want to say narrative because then that starts to get
Yeah.
to. You're able to tell the story. You're able to fully produce it, go through it without the time restrictions of, we got a 4 o'clock deadline. We got this package has to, this piece needs to get into the news station by 3:30 so that it can air at 4 or 4:15 or 4:10 or however that plays out. Um, do you sleep ever?
I do a lot of napping. I'm up a lot. I think I used to be when in my previous life, I was like in bed by 10, up by 4 a.m. I could sip coffee for 2 hours. Now it's just kind of whatever comes and goes. A lot of times I'm working nights or on my way home, something else pops, I'm back out. It's kind of that way. But the energy and excitement that comes from that keeps it going. Um, a big difference too, I think, between myself and I'll touch on the McGinn one a little bit. So, as McGinn's sons, for anybody who's watching who doesn't know the story, his adult son now lives in the McGinn family home. Mike McGinn and his wife have moved to DC to continue his career. His son, who's an adult, late 20s, I believe 28, 29, Homeland Security came and raided the home. He admitted to what he was doing. So, it's not as though we were putting words in his mouth. But at the time, I think, in talking to some of the stations, they were stuck with that he was under investigation. He had not been formally charged because you can be arrested while under investigation, and they were stuck with that. And I would push back on that, saying, okay, let's just say that's true. You can say under investigation, but still in custody. And what they opted to do was I had photos of the raid, I had footage of the house, we had a significant package. All they did was take the SPD did a blotter post later. They did a screenshot of the blotter post, a quick mention, and just moved on. And it was frustrating to see because I think it does matter for two reasons. One, I don't want to just go do exposés on people's lives and ruin their lives. It's not my intent. But that story was out enough. There were enough people who lived in the area talking about it on Reddit. It was spreading, and you want to actually try and get that to a factual base set of facts, and don't let the public just play the game of telephone, or you'll have far more chaos. And if you can come in and make sure that they factually understand it. And that story too is one, or I was leading with to that is talking about not sleeping and getting all this information. The
Sure.
big difference that I have found that gives me an advantage over the stations or the traditional media, because they have entire research rooms, they have many layers of people that I can't compete with. What I have that they don't, and it's worked out repeatedly. There was recently a politician who's now in jail for killing a young girl here locally. I got that story because of the followers. Originally, you want a lot of followers. It's a lot of fun to grow social media and get recognized for your work, and that's well and good. The difference, though, is I now have over 1.4 million people who follow my work across platforms. What that really means is 1.4 million people out there all over the place sending me info going, hey, uh, the coroner or the King County medical examiner just pulled up and this person just got arrested and I'm getting it before the stations ever can. And they're in the way that they can access me feels like a lower threshold. They don't have to email an anonymous tip email. I get the amount of information. I get hundreds of messages a day saying, hey, this is happening, that's happening. Now you still got to go through and actually validate all that stuff that comes in.
Sure.
But that was the game changer. And that really in the last 6 months opened up so many doors where I'm getting so much information and so many things happening that they're just not getting.
Let's talk about that story real quick too. I don't want to say quick, but let's talk about that
Sure.
story about this former politician. That story just kind of, I asked, I was like, has anybody seen this story? Obviously, and then I'm like showing everybody. They're like, no one had a clue. And I know that in the story you had talked about as you're, and I think it was in a follow up story that people were coming down on you about calling the individual sex workers.
Yeah,
Um, and the story that is of a former council member from was it Bothell? Is that
that's
correct?
right. That's right.
I'm baffled. I on levels uh, that I can't comprehend. Like I understand the whole the piece of you know the unspoken piece that no one likes to talk about that isn't sexy about people paying for sex and that whole industry. Look, I'm not here to judge anyone for what they do. That's for another show. That's not my place to judge. It's unfortunate that somebody's daughter passed away. She was trying to make a living. It right? Not my place, not my call to make. It's unfortunate that somebody's daughter, somebody's family member, somebody's friend is no longer with us because of a selfish act of an individual who may allegedly had killed an individual in an encounter. What do we know about this story? What do you
Yeah, so
know?
this one, I've wanted to put out some information on how I even got this because I think it's a testament to kind of this type of work and where it can go. So everybody missed that story. It had happened the day before I actually did the initial rundown. And the reason I found out about it, and it's kind of cool, I think, in showing if you just shoot stories straight and factual, what can come of it. What I found out a while back was not only do I have a massive amount, a very high number of law enforcement and investigators who follow my work, but a large amount, very large amount of people from the other side of the street, pimps and sex workers and people doing wild stuff out there who like watching my stuff. Some of my favorite place to go at night when I'm working a scene is the toughest part of town because I get out and everybody's like, "Hey, can I get a picture? I love this. I love that." They don't do that in the other parts of town. They kind of look the other way and it's like, "Oh shit, if this guy's here, something bad must have just happened." But they're
Right.
like, "Hey, thanks for just saying what's going on out here and just letting people know." Because of that, at that particular story, I had received a photo of that city council member in handcuffs the day it happened, within a couple hours of him being arrested, covered in blood. And I was getting it from a lot of girls she worked around saying, "Hey, this guy just killed one of our girls out here." I actually knew him from some years ago through my work, my camera work. I have interviewed him in the past, talked with him a bit. And I look at the picture, I haven't seen him in a couple of years, and I was like, "Oh, I think I know who this is," instantly. And so I messaged back. I was like, "Who do you think this guy is?" They go, "Well, we don't know. We're hearing he might be a politician. They've been dating." And they kind of give me this whole backstory on how they knew each other. So at that point, I'm like, all right, I got to get to the bottom of this. I start checking booking records. He's not booked. I'm starting to call contacts. I'm starting to go, I'm getting a massive head start from every other agency. I don't call the stations yet because so far I kind of have a half baked something. As I said, I don't gatekeep, but I also need to have something to actually pass on. As it went through that night, I'm getting more people hitting me up who knew of their relationship. It sounds like it started out as, what you call a professional relationships. She is seeing him through her work. At some point, that apparently then transitions into he wants to not have her doing that work. He's willing to financially support her and wants to continue to control her life and so on. And then eventually, she's no longer comfortable with him and he's feels like he's paying a lot of money and should get more, and then it ends the way it does. During the night, at about 5:41 in the morning, finally he gets booked. I find out later the reason is once he got arrested, he had to go to Harborview because of these self-inflicted wounds. They then couldn't book until next morning. Then they retro book him back to where he could see the judge that day. Now I have a name. Now, as I talked about earlier, I've gotten many, many tips. I've got photos. I've got all this stuff. Now I've got a name on a government document that says this guy, this age, this birth date is in for this. I got it now. So I decide I'm going to release something right now. And so I, in my driveway, shoot a quick video as I'm going to head that way and start putting together the rest of the story. And said, I'm the only one talking about this, which is reality. This thing happened now at that point, 18 hours previous. Nobody's on it. Nobody even knew it happened. And I knew nobody had it happen because once I posted the video, about 10 minutes later, I started calling around to different newsrooms and stuff saying, hey, what do you guys know? And they're going, we just watched your video 5 times taking notes. Like, how did you even get this? And it's like,
Oh,
I'm
wow.
kind of dumbfounded at this point going, you really didn't have it? And they go, no, we're still trying to, they're trying to call people at SPD, get something to back it. And then for the rest of the day, they're all playing catch up, right? I'm already way ahead. They're still trying to figure out, was it even him? And I've already got motive. I've got lead up. I've got all those things. And so, and then it's kind of stayed that way. We've had other stories. The guy that we'll probably talk about too, who SPD shot, I had motive and everything long before everybody else. And it comes from though, having that kind of reach. That's the followers are fun and it's cool to say you got them. What they really are is an amazing tool to be able to get information quickly.
It's interesting to me to, as we sit here and have a conversation, because this is the first time you and I have ever, had a chance to chat. Um, Listening to your stories and having you share this with us, um, the levels that you don't have, the bureaucracy, all the
Yeah.
stuff. It's just
Yeah.
how many people are on your team besides you? There's others, right, that work with you
Yeah.
that do this. You have a couple
So
other people.
there's an editor named Laramie, and so he actually sits. You can see that table back there. That's where he
Yeah,
sits. He does a lot of. I'll go shoot, then he goes to the body part washing up on shore. That's when we never got to go there to film it because it's so sporadic. I basically build out. I write up what I'm going to say. I then shoot it into camera. I have a camera with a teleprompter over here. It then goes to him, and then from there, I just get a finished piece back. Sometimes I'll have a little bit of feedback, but he just kills it every time. And then there's 2 photographers who also go out at night, Brandon and Wyatt, and they like to just shoot. Both of them are phenomenal photographers. I think crime photography and incident photography has a way of not really getting to show your skill set. They do a lot of auto photography, people photography, just great shooters. Wyatt also is a really good editor. The piece that I just put out of some of my 2020 footage with the music, that was
yeah,
actually him. So I just handed him my hard drive and he came up with that.
that's great.
And then from there, there's a handful of people who I can lean on for help for research. Research is actually a huge undertaking. Every city, every municipality, every county puts their documents out differently. They have a completely different infrastructure online, completely different way they call documents different things. Just
Sure.
getting stuff to where we can get our facts is a lot of the work. Going out and shooting it, that's actually probably the easiest part. Knowing it happened, getting there, getting footage, that part's slam dunk. Now being able to get all the evidence and stuff together is the work.
I feel that the way in which we consume media, and we talked about this earlier in the show about like sitting down to watch it. Um, I'll be honest with you, Steve. I think what you're doing is cutting edge, where you're able to tell the story without having like how everyone consumes media now. I mean,
Mm.
this is the way of the future, right? I mean, there's a handful of people that are listening to this radio show who maybe watching the stream, and however you're consuming this show, you, they're not. No one sits down to watch the news. I don't even watch the news anymore. Well, I have reasons why I don't watch the news anymore, but I just don't find it. I feel like it's time consuming. The most, if I'm going to watch anything, it's going to be live sports. Occasionally, I'll watch the news, and now I know that someone's retiring from the TV station after something
Yeah,
years.
and they put a lot of effort into those, don't they?
Yeah,
Those retirement pieces are huge.
right. Or I got to go back for the 70th anniversary, and whoo, you go to the, and that stuff is all fine and dandy. Look,
Yeah.
I definitely being an alum now. now that I don't actually work there, um, it's not it's kind of it's okay not to like consume it. I think what I really wanted to do was kind of like consume news on a different level. And this is the one thing I always try to tell individuals: don't be a sheep. Don't just
Mm,
like you're just consuming and you're like, okay, we're just going battle prod, we're going through whatever. Do some research. It's a little extra to get it, and I think that you provide that. So if someone is looking for, good news, journalistic integrity, Steve, your stuff is great. It's
thank
phenomenal,
you.
and they can find you on Instagram. Uh, if you're like, where do I find Steve? If you're listening to the radio, you can find him at Photog Steve 81 on Instagram. We'll have the links available on the podcast, on the YouTube channel as well. Okay, guys, we're going to go someplace that typically isn't really talked about. It's not sexy. It's not fun. This is something that kind of was like, you know what? I want to have him. The real reason why I wanted to have you come on is uh, I felt like you were speaking to me, but I think you were speaking to everybody. Um, and that to me is great journalism, being able to tell the story and to feel like you're having a conversation, which is clearly hard to have when you're just the only one there looking at the camera, but to tell the
Yeah.
story, but to like feel like you're engaging with them. Several weeks back, there was a story, and I think that you even broke the story while you were in NAB in a hotel. Is that right?
Yeah.
Um, the footage that you had prior to that, there was a great piece that you had. You're out, I'm out NAB, blah blah blah, and you had this like cameo and great stuff, and um, but it led into this story um, that talks about an individual that was going to meet up with with a family. A family was. How did this even come to the table? How did you get the information about this horrific? This story goes into levels of things that are going around here that I
Mhm.
don't think people are really talking about, Steve.
Yeah, this was a really interesting scenario. So thankfully, I have my two photographers still here while I was down in Vegas. There's this National Association of Broadcasters thing they do every year, and you go down there, learn about the latest tips and gears, and everybody talks about how great they are. It's the usual convention.
Right.
And then I get word while I was in my hotel that there's an officer involved shooting in Tequila, but it involves SPD an op, what we call an op that went sideways. And that was kind of all I had. So I check first. There is a shooting call that lines up with this hotel. So I start calling some people in Tequila,
Hmm.
and they have no idea about this. So, which was interesting. And I don't say that to say that somehow this was a botched situation. It's just a lot of times when these ops happen, you don't want to broadcast it out to too many places because you don't want it to get out. And so they actually had an officer involved shooting, and for a significant amount of time, a lot of them didn't even know what was happening. And there's already aid and stuff coming, at least in the leadership side. So I'm now stuck with, okay, I've heard again, I've heard this happen. This is starting to check out. I don't have anything yet. So I call my guys. I said, you got to go there now. This is kind of half baked, but just go. They start heading that way. Then, as fire gets on scene, I'm able to start hearing kind of the situation of what's happening. It's confirmed that it's cops. At that point, we thought it was just two Seattle police officers who were there. Then we hear it was part of a sex trafficking sting. And sex trafficking is actually a very broad term now. If you go back, that used to really be used for a very specific thing. And now, as they've not wanted to use words like prostitution and so on, it's kind of all ends up in that umbrella. So I still don't know much of what happened. We then find out that at least two officers discharged their weapons. He's deceased. It's on the fifth floor. There's a number of things. It's like, this is odd. I know that hotel where it's at. I've never been in it, but my photographers are saying it's one of these big open atrium type places. And they're saying it happened up there, but there's all these other areas shut down. And then coming back to a lot of followers, I got people who are staying in the hotel start sending me photos from inside the building. And so what they're telling us at the press conference and what they're starting to disseminate isn't quite lining up with the footage that's in there. And so I kind of start diving deeper. So first thing that happens in this busy, you got to get out. What is the basic set of facts that we know? And you got to own it. You got to grab a hold of the story. So from my hotel, I put out a quick story that, hey, this happened. We're getting information. My guys had already sent me some clips from the scene at that point. Now we're seeing a massive amount of SPD leadership show up. Tequila's there, but they're taking a secondary stance. This thing's getting layers. What came of that, though, is I said, shoot every single thing you can. Remember this, we're shooting on SD cards. We're not burning film, get everything. And they managed to get a car that nobody else gets getting towed early on, really early on. Usually when there's something like this, the scene just gets iced. Nothing gets touched for hours. And they wanted this car gone early. And I said, get me that license plate. I want to know the car. That sent me down the path of who is this guy. And I don't know if either some of the other cameramen, camera people, number one, didn't see it, or two, didn't understand the gravity of it. They might have thought the same thing I did. That can't have anything to do with this. Why are they towing it so fast, right? Well, because it's evidence, and they want this thing closed down. That day, I then find out who drove the car and where he lives and who he is. I start looking at his background, and you can actually find him on Google because he was the medical director for Guantanamo Bay under Bush and Obama for a couple of years. And I'm looking, I was like, this can't be. This is too absurd. Yeah, huge. So then I start looking, and we find that he also has some past arrests for sex trafficking, and that he's been traveling around and so on. So I'm going, okay, we have something. Again, we realize nobody else is touching this. I start texting other people I know in the space, hey, do you know who the guy is? Like, we have no idea. And I'm like, okay, we're going, let's do it. And it comes down to just having resources out there. And from there, start finding out that the sting operation consisted of this. He believed that he was communicating with a mother who had a 7 and 11-year-old daughter. He wanted to rape those two girls. And the mother said that for a certain amount of money, she would let him do that. There was a considerable amount of negotiation that went into it. And they then set up this meet to happen at this hotel room in Tequila. And when he knocked on the door, there were actually 3 Seattle police officers who opened the door. He then pulls out this gun out of his jacket pocket, and they then open up, and they shoot a lot, right? So the footage was pretty wild, and it was interesting in telling that story because a lot of these, I come in to tell you the base level of facts. I'm not going to give you cause and effect. I'm not going to make it political. I don't open up with, in woke Seattle. I just say in the city of Seattle, right? We just go, because it's not that I don't believe politics aren't in a lot of things, but you've got to wait on that. Let's agree as a group of people, as everybody watching this is the base level set of agreed upon facts. Then if you want to take the baton and go from there, more power to you. That's not what I do, but that's what we do here. So we go through showing this is what happened. Sometimes when I'll show these, people go, man, they shot so many times. Wow. If this is a child molester, that apparently killing child molesters is the universal love language. I was waiting for man, we're going to put this out. I didn't post all the body cam footage, but I'm thinking, man, people are going to get really hostile. I got to watch the comments, try and tame it down. And it was like 99.9% of people are like, why didn't they put another clip in and empty that one too? Usually, and even a lot of people say, I don't like cops, but I like this. And it's like, okay, we need to keep going with this story. People want to know more.
It's interesting because when you watch the footage, we'll link it. The footage and the story that you told here, I think I laughed at the piece where you're like explaining to someone who may not understand what mag dump means.
Yeah.
That they will shoot you. They will shoot you until they basically they unload the entire magazine. But again, someone who was in Police Explorers, but let's not get it twisted. That was such a long time ago. But when I made that decision not to go into law enforcement at that point in my life, I was like, well, I don't know that I could actually shoot anybody. I was like, yeah, it's not my thing. But I was like, well, clearly they didn't leave any room for error because that guy is not going to be around to tell his side of the story. Right. And as you then, so that piece comes out, then you do another piece that kind of continues your investigation on the same said story. How did that story evolve? I mean, just more research, right? And time spent with.
It was one once we realized, hey, this is really something here, and saw the response of people who watched it. I thought, okay, let's keep going with this. And so, um, what's been really neat out of this that has come from it is, so there's some large military publications. I'm not going to name who they are, but significant ones people have heard of, even if you're not in the military. And people, because I think people think that somehow they don't want this out. And there's a lot who don't want to tell the story. They're not doing what I did, even locals. This is one where I do believe they made a decision to not continue the story and explain who this man was, and explain kind of really the issues that are happening out in public all the time. But the military publications that are very pro-military started putting stuff out in the following weeks. I got reached out to by a couple of journalists who write big articles, who said that work was amazing. We wanted to keep going, but we had a time limit that we couldn't get to. So we put out what we did. I'll tell you right now, I'm not going to be able to go back. They didn't give me budget. They didn't give me time. I have other cases, not quite that amazing. I don't want to allude to that. There's this, a bunch of military people out there trying to meet with mothers, but really bad stuff. They go, can we start sending you files for you to keep working with them? Because what
Wow.
you will find as you look into this, and I think it's, it comes to my point earlier, that a lot of the issues that I've had with the media are really coming from the top down. The journalists that you see out there, they went into this line of work because they wanted to tell stories. They wanted to investigate things. And this is a great testament that this person reaches out going, please, like, I will send you everything I put together that I couldn't finish. And can you just take the baton and keep going with it? And I think that's an amazing thing. And you start to realize that a lot of the industry is that these are people that they didn't know they were going to be on TV, or that their name would get known. They just wanted to tell stories and they want to get into it. And now they're farther in their career and they're finding that they're held back, and they still want it to happen. And so that's been another thing where now I'm starting to get files, large files, tied to Joint Base Lewis McChord here locally in this state, where I can work these, and I'll be able to tell stories that I wouldn't say the media doesn't want to, but they just can't. They factually can't. And so now we're going to be able to get to do that.
And when you were talking about this agency that set up the sting operation down in Tukwila, you said there was a full agency that just focuses on this type of
Yeah.
crimes. Um, and I think the general public, I think we all are in a bliss of like, we live our daily lives, and like to not think of like somebody's daughter, or, you know, there's like a full team
Mhm.
that Seattle has that is working these types of crimes. If it's sex trafficking, uh, uh, it blows my mind that, I know that when, the joke is you drive down Aurora, you're like, oh yeah, you drive by the Krispy Kremes, you might see someone, do a magical thing on the pole dance or whatever on the street pole. But again, these stories that aren't being told, that are like horrific. I mean, it's unfathomed to me that we live in a day and age where I think we are so immersed in our own little bubble that the stories like this that are being told by you obviously aren't always taken to the level where you have the resources, which may be also limited, but you have the ability to tell a little bit more than just like, tonight at 5 there's a guy shot, police officer, blah, blah, blah. Check out the full story at 11. It's different. You have that ability to kind of tell the story. And I think that it's important that we open our eyes. We're able to see these stories because look, man, it's unfortunate that even for someone who's a dad, like my biggest worry is like your kid being kidnapped, right?
Yeah.
Or it's on horrific levels of like, even when I go to like a store, it's like I'm always aware of my surroundings, but I feel like sometimes we just get in this the day-to-day nuances of life, and we're just like, boom, just get through it. And then here we are, we come across a story that, yes, there was a guy who was, the story was told two different ways, right? And the
Mhm.
way you told the story, quite an amazing piece, but it opened my eyes to say, holy smokes, if there's an entire team at Seattle that just works on these types of crimes, how much is out there that that the media is not talking about? How much have
Yeah.
you not, have not covered,
Mhm.
or been able to put to the light to the average consumer to share these stories. If there's something that you would say to someone right now, I mean, you're probably getting thousands of tips or tips in general of what these types of crimes are happening. Do you feel like you will be doing more of those types of
Yeah.
investigations?
So this is going to become a big direction I'm going. So that task force is called ICAC, or the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. SPD heads up this task force, but it actually involves multiple agencies across the state. There are many, many people working full time on this. I've talked to a lot of them who've said, we work full time. And I'm telling you, they work like 20. You think I work a lot? We joke about me not sleeping.
Right.
They're going to a whole nother level. And they are saying they're not even scratching the surface. They don't know if they're actually making a measurable impact out there. They're concerned they're not. A couple things about that organization also. They are publicly funded through tax dollars. It is Seattle Police Department, but they operate, a huge amount of their budget comes from donation from private parties. That means they need way more money. And what I found out in telling that story is people from around that work started reaching out saying, we want to tell these stories so badly, but what we can't have are our means and methods being leaked. They're nervous to work with a lot of media organizations because they don't want more information out there that just makes their job get harder.
Sure.
They also don't want to compromise investigations that are in process. And a lot of these people, we talk about undercovers and such. These people are deep undercover, right? So you can't go out, get interviews and such. It's a real challenge for them. They want the stories out, but inherently, for them to do the best work, they can't really participate with media. What I think is going to happen, though, hopefully in the near future, is I will start getting more of these that I can start telling the public, so that the public can understand the gravity of this problem, the scope of this problem, and how really widespread it really is, and hopefully be able to direct money there, because businesses can also donate to them, people can donate to them, but also create purpose. What I don't want to do is desensitize the public by continuing to tell them this to where that just becomes noise. That story hit because of the gravity of it and who was involved, and I got a lot of attention. If you keep telling them and don't pick the right stories and the right time and the right way to tell it, you just become another person talking about something. But also talking to them, I think some things changed from when we were growing up. When I grew up, I mean, my parents were really good about don't talk to strangers. There's always that fear of
Sure.
what if, but you really hardly ever heard about it. And now there's so much more happening. And what they believe is going on is not only one, are kids more available through the internet to have predators find them and take advantage of them, but also the predators themselves, who in the past were pretty isolated to themselves, generally didn't know other people. Now they are also able to congregate within each other and learn methods and exchange information. And that's where these child pornography rings have become a really big issue, in that now they're all getting images, they're creating images, then disseminating it to others on a large scale. And then it's really become a much bigger problem. So not only do you have children more available, you have the predators themselves able to operate and teach each other in a way we've never really seen in history. All those things come together, and that's why we have this problem to this level.
And something we talked about earlier, and I think we were kind of joking about, Pacific Northwest capital of, serial killers. Um, does this feel like this is the new type of serial killer where, you talked about a task force like the Green River Task Force for Gary Ridgway, or the Green River Killer, for those who may not be native from the Pacific Northwest or have any clue. I'm sure everyone knows who Gary Ridgway is in the Green River Killer. But growing up from the Pacific Northwest, I was terrified. I lived in Kent. I went to school in Des Moines, up the from the Green River. I remember coming back with my dad from a Mexican restaurant in Kent across the Green River Bridge, and there they were pulling out the first body.
Yeah.
Being that little. Do we feel like that this is that type of level of like them trying to get a handle of this, like, because there was such a predominant of Gary Ridgway or the Green River Killer. They put a task force together. They're trying to catch this guy, but they're not just trying to catch one person. They're trying to catch multiple people. I mean, this is on levels that are probably probably just so out of control that they. I mean, my mind is like blown right now as you're telling me these. I'm like, I can't even fathom how many people are out there that they're trying to catch, and will they will make a significant dent in this type of crime. It's just going to take time and resources like yourself and us sharing these types of stories so that it becomes, I don't want to say make it numb, but to enhance the awareness to the normal public to say, hey, look, this is going on out there. This could be your child. This could be your cousin. This could be a family member. This could be a friend of a friend. You just don't know what's happening out there. And these stories are so horrific that even myself, I'm like, I'm like, I just don't want to go out. Not that I don't want to go out, but it's like you want to keep your kids safe and close.
Mhm.
You don't know what the capabilities of one individual might be. Um, I think about these stories, and I think about one that I haven't even heard about in a while, but it reminds me of the 16-year-old girl that they found her body on 509. I don't know if you
Mhm.
remember this story. Um, the news covered the story, but that was it. It was in and out.
Mhm.
And I don't know whatever happened to that young lady that was 16. She was young. They found her body on 509. Don't know what happened, but this was very close to the same time they found the body in the Duwamish River, just by the Duwamish Bridge, in the same proximity. I'm like, and everyone is now freaking out. The stories that were told online were completely different. That there was a local serial killer, that she may have been picked up from someone from a nightclub who had money. The stories were wild out there. What
Mhm.
was actually said, what was done, I was like, this is someone's family member. This is someone's daughter. Again, these types of cases, I don't have the resource to go and like do the
Right.
investigation. But what happens to like these types of like this? Could this? Have you heard about this story? Was this something that was brought to your attention
Yeah,
back
I
in the?
remember it. I had looked into it at the time, and I remember the King County Sheriff's Department even had to release a statement because it really there was a local page that has a large amount of distribution and does like to be a little bit more provocative and push the concept that this was a serial killer.
Right,
There was nothing from so it really was only that in the public. Behind the scenes, there was really nothing indicating that there was a serial killer of any kind. But it was wild to watch that grow. I think that there was a couple things that were happening around the time, and it was kind of like the pandemic. You have a few
yes,
things line up, and all of a sudden, all the dots connect, and boom, we're going to where they actually because they in the beginning they weren't going to make a statement. They're like, we don't have time for this. This is what, and then they realized like, okay, we really need to get on this and like quell this down. And it was interesting to watch too, because I think the sheriff's department kind of learned something through that experience too. That if you sit back and do nothing and think that you are that you speaking to this is not worthy of your attention or whatever it is, you're wrong. You need to get on this stuff and you need to get on this stuff quickly because if you don't, by the time you do, there'll always be the what if component. Get out there, get ahead of it, disclose properly, and get ahead. There's, Pierce County Sheriff's Department, there's a guy down there, Darren Moss, who's their PIO. I talk about him frequently. I think he is one of the strongest PIOs, maybe nationally, but definitely locally. He is very proactive, gets information out there quickly. He knows how to edit a video, get it out, and he really becomes the standard, even ahead of the news. And maybe sometime we could talk about that whole part of the world too of departments that don't like to try and work with media and how do they deal with that. And I think that
sure,
the Pierce County Sheriff's Department just decided we'll just own the process better than we think the media could, and we'll just become the standard, and people will just look to us instead of trying to check their news app. And they've done a pretty remarkable job. There's also some you could make an argument that well now you have the government setting the narrative. So I'm not saying it doesn't have its own challenges, but that was really their thing. Is you get other agencies out here who just don't want to play ball, they don't want to disclose, and they don't participate, and then that lets the public come up with their own conclusions, or the
sure.
news will start grasping at straws.
It was interesting because I think the case of the body that was found in the Duwamish, I was like, I was like, okay, let me put my pieces together. I'm like, what's I think they have like I know that there's an area that a homeless population back then that was going on. Um And I mean, that could have been a case too, who knows what's going on. And it's quite interesting because when you're not a part of that community, it's like it's like the plague. You're like, I don't want to be a part of that. I don't want any, you just don't. And
Yeah.
you just drive by it and you're like, wow, an eyesore. But clearly that whole area has been cleaned up.
Hmm.
And it's unfortunate because I barely can, get the show out as much as I possibly can. But to look to you towards these types of stories, I don't feel uh, like the modern day. I don't want to say this, but it feels to me like the modern day serial killer can't really exist like they did back in the 80s. Just with social media. But I mean, that one did spread like wildfire because I remember seeing on blog posts of these different little, neighborhood blog posts. Like and people just went crazy. They're like, oh my God, there is a serial killer. He's brand new, the body over here, this one over here. Women need to be careful, blah, 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 blah. Look, in these types of stereotypes of when the media doesn't get ahead of the story, as you were just saying, the story
Absolutely.
transforms into a whole new piece.
And the
Uh,
media not participating adds to the concern, right? Inherently, them saying, well, we're just not going to address this has people going, well, no wonder it must be true. Now you're trying to hold it back.
Right. And I think this really boils back to, again, resources, understanding. Again, like I always tell everyone, look, if you're going to watch the news, make sure you get the full story, understand what you're learning, what you're consuming on many levels. And I know that we typically don't have that ability to do the research, or it's like, if it bleeds, it leads. I mean, these were, disgusting lines from back in the day. But to understand what we're consuming as a consumer of news, I have to give you like full props with the
Okay.
resources that I'm sure very much limited, more than a big TV news station, to be able to like do what you do. It's on levels that look so great,
Thank
and
you.
I say this because it feels to me like I'm watching a younger version of some of these big anchors who were correspondents back in the day. When you talk about
Mm.
Peter Jennings out there, and in these war zones, and Dan Rathers, and Walter, not Walter Cronkite, because that was way before my time, but Tom Brokaw. To watch them do these things made me really think of, oh wow, Steve is doing very much what I think is missed in today's local news pieces. So again, it's refreshing. If anyone's looking for news that doesn't have a lean, you need to follow Steve, and your social handles are available. Instagram, because then it links to everything. Photog Steve 81. Before we head out, Steve, is there something that you would like to share with us tonight that maybe someone isn't has no idea, that they're like, wow, this is a great story that maybe it's not being covered on the news, or um, maybe it's just something in general that inspires you, that keeps you awake every night.
Yeah, I think, we talked about it a bit already, but I really think trying to get deeper into these ICAC type stories and being able to really help the public understand how they can actually help in these scenarios, whether that be donations or spreading awareness. A lot of what I've been able to do is actually help victims, and hopefully along the way, a couple investigations be able to get information out as needed. But, there's find a purpose in this stuff. Find something that you can actually contribute to. Being able to come out here and get people to watch is one thing, and it's a lot of fun to get out there and get a lot of views, but find an actual purpose. And for me, that's really to just try and add a voice to the victims that may have otherwise been missed, and also be able to help some of these organizations like ICAC be able to do more.
And has your stories even? Do you feel like your stories are, like, especially these big ones, like the one down in Tequila? Do those even make national news?
No, I actually tried to feed that one nationally. I tried that one and the Mike McGinn. So I have access to all the national desks too,
Sure.
and they are not taking it. And that I do have a little bit more frustration than I do the local news, because I know what their resource level is. And I think part of it too is they don't seem to value the online component to their business at all. They're all about broadcast because that's where their marketing dollars are driven from, and
Sure.
that's where their revenue comes from. And it comes back to, what are you in this for? You got to make money. I'm with it. I'm with that. These are for-profit entities. But some of these stories need to get out. Use your internet arms to do that, where you have unlimited bandwidth to push information.
Sure.
60 Minutes, has a great TikTok, by the way. So, how much more traditional can you get than 60 Minutes? And they are killing it on TikTok because they realize that you need to be able to continue to get those eyes to come over and watch your really heavy, impactful work. Don't turn away from it and act like you are better than that. You are doing the public a disservice with that mentality. Get them to come in. You're selling tickets to the show on TikTok. Get out there, get some content out there so they go,
Sure.
man, I don't remember last time I watched 60 Minutes. I want to hear more about this. And they're
Right.
one of the few organizations that really understood that. And too many of these think that they're too good for it, and they're not using their biggest platform. I reach millions daily. There is not a local news station that can say the same thing. And that helps in so many other ways if you care about the work.
And I think that will continue to create almost a new standard, Steve, as you continue down this journey, which it's going to be fun to continue to watch because you will be, I want to call, you look back and before cable was a thing, it was like 4, 5, 7, 11, right?
Yep.
13 or whatever, the UH channel 22. You're in that, you're there. You're there on a level that has supersede, which see is the future of news stories being told on a level. Like, sure, the news stations stream their shows, right? But to be able to tell these stories, these packages that are told on the TV station, what you're doing, I feel, is being missed as you being thrown to the wayside, as you're saying. I think this is where it's at. I mean, people are going to consume the news on this level. The fact that news stations and agencies aren't taking, you're ahead of the game. So you're already in this lead. I believe, as you're saying, that you're right. That measurable of that mighty tough broadcast television station is traditional. That I understand. But the way and how you have so many different ways to now share that same story, I think they still are kind of waiting, still behind the bus on. So
Well, now
again,
that their non-compete clauses are no longer valid, if you saw that in the news, I think you're going to
yes,
see a big shift. I talked to a lot of them in that space who wanted to break out of there, but those non-competes have kept them. I think you're going to see a lot change just in the next 12 months.
it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I mean, we're going to watch people retire, people move away, continue to grow. I'm excited to continue to watch you. Again, if there's something, what's going to be interesting for us too, Stephen, what we're excited to be doing is we're going to go back to the studio inside the flagship station of KVI,
Yeah.
and we're going to do the show live, which we haven't done in a while, which is exciting. But we're going to do 2 hours instead of just the one. And to do 2 hours of radio is a lot of work for one individual because I don't have a producer. I do it all myself. And that was the one thing that uh when I built this radio show was from soup to nuts to do it all myself. So everything is done with, well, a little help from AI, but the rest of it is, editing wise, yeah, it's all me.
That's
So
awesome.
again, Steve, it's an honor to have you come on to share these stories. If something breaks or if there's something, I mean, you don't need to bring it to the radio, but we would love to continue just to hear your stories and to continue to share them for those of the older generation that maybe don't know how to type or maybe arthritis has kicked in and they just consume it on this level. And the one thing I would say is radio is still romantic. We still tell a story. You have to build these stories and you tell the story and then you build the picture in your head. So again, you're doing it on levels that are quite astonishing and just brilliant. Again, enough. I can't say enough, but man, if you have a chance, go check out Steve's stuff. Instagram, go find him, Photog Steve 81. Any parting words before we go?
No, this has been awesome. I'm looking forward to coming back. We'll get into some other deeper stories.
when we we look forward to it. Again, I appreciate your time, and we'll chat with you soon.
Thank you.